What happens when one man tries to watch all the horror movies of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project, 1981. Here we go, kicking off the year 1981 in the 80s Project. And 1980 was pretty solid with some great films and some important moments in horror history. But it's nothing compared to 81. You guys have no idea what's in store for this year. Tons of great slasher flicks, the beginnings of a horror comedy boom, and the ultimate experience in grueling horror. But let's kick it off and take a look at the very beginnings of the year 1981. We're going to kick off the year literally with January 1st with Scream. Although that date seems a bit disputed, with some sources not having it released until 1983. This one begins the old-fashioned way with a group of people on a camping trip in a wooded area with like a sitcom theme song playing.
Thank you.
They end up in this old ghost town, and here's a cool fact. This is actually just Paramount Ranch, which was a ghost town set that was in the mountains by Malibu that was used in about 1 million movies. And I was able to visit it a while back, but it burned down in the 2018 fires and is in the process of being rebuilt. Westworld was filmed here, Firefly used it, it was part of the town in Bone Tomahawk, and I could literally just sit here and list out about 100 other movies made there. They all settle in for the night and then basically just wander around for a bit, but that night several other members are killed by an unseen killer. The next day when they try to leave, their rafts are destroyed, so they're stranded, and this was directed by Byron Quisenberry, who only directed 2 movies, this one and another one in 2004. But his main gig was as a stuntman, and he worked in that capacity on some pretty big flicks, including Return of the Living Dead. And this movie's actually been out there as a couple of different titles. It was shot under the name Butcher Baker Candlestick Maker, which doesn't really make all that much sense. And it was then released as Scream, and interestingly does have a ghost, but ironically it has no face. And it was actually reissued later on under the name The Outing. Under any title though, it often gets lumped in with the bevy of Friday the 13th clones at the time, and I can see the comparisons, but they are pretty different movies. My rating on it is a 2. It's pretty damn slow and kinda underwhelming. Its horror cultural significance is also pretty low as well at a 1.5. It's pretty forgotten and forgettable, and I'm just giving it the extra half for sharing a pretty famous name. Should you watch it? You can safely pass. Not much happens. Woo! Another movie that seems to have a disputed date but is reported to have been released on January 1st is the Loch Ness Horror, but is also said to have not hit the screens until 1982. It kicks off on the infamous Loch with this guy who has a magic telescope that shows him an airplane in the sky, even though he's kind of looking downwards. I mean, look at this. He's looking down on the plane, so he'd have to be at a really, really high vantage point. And then he's eye level with the water and sees the monster poking his head out. It's supposed to be like World War II era and then jumps ahead 40 years. And Nessie's still there, as is that downed airplane. And look at this puppet. This is lovably derpy. And then this scientist teams up with an American sonar guy to try to track down the monster. These guys have stolen one of Nessie's eggs, and even though this is supposed to be Scotland, the entire film was done in California on Lake Tahoe, including this Scottish-looking castle, which is also on the lake. This one was directed by Larry Buchanan, director of such classics as Mars Needs Women and Zontar, the Thing from Venus. They have the old Scottish guy claim to have taken the famous surgeon photo, the one that has now been confirmed to be a fake. Nessie appears, and that roar is familiar. And the doc gives us some suspect information.
An otter can go 800 feet down and take its oxygen from the surrounding waters. But they are not aquatic.
They are, though. Loch keeps attacking, and every time it does, I just feel like it should be like sporting some twin ion engines. And it's a weird movie. Like, there's a whole sequence with a crazy old guy attacking some kids for no reason, and they just have shots of Nessie sort of like looking on, like damn, that guy's nuts. The monster is pretty hilarious because it's clearly just the headpiece, and it's not that big really. It just seems capable of basically headbutting people to death, and then this? It didn't really make any money on its release and has never really been considered a classic or anything, but has since become one of the more well-known Loch Ness monster movies, which is not really that big of a pond to be a big fish in. I'm giving it a 2 because outside of some fun monster sequences, not much happens. It's pretty dull, but when Nessie does show up, it's a good time. I just wish there was more of it. Its significance is a 1.5 since, again, not extremely well known or done, and doesn't really feature any prominent figures, but it is a slightly more well-known Nessie flick. Should you watch it? Probably not, unless you want to see those handful of fun puppet scenes.
Is it true, Mr. Dean, that Americans go to the picture house more than once a month and spend a lot of time looking at magazines of naked women?
Yes.
Our first movie of the year with a definitive date should need no introduction, and it was Scanners, released on January 14th. It has Cameron Vale here, who we quickly learn possesses some extra mind bullet abilities, and he's captured and made a prisoner by someone who might have some familiarity with that concept. And we find out about scanners. They're people with psychic powers of a sort, and this guy with a very familiar looking head gives a demonstration. And Richter volunteers and leads us to one of the most outstanding and memorable effects in history, one that I don't suppose I can show on YouTube. But imagine this movie is a Gallagher performance and this guy is a watermelon. And this one was a pretty early entry by the great David Cronenberg, who by this point was a known commodity and had built a reputation around a particular type of body horror. It wasn't exactly a smooth production, and Cronenberg has often referred to it as one of his more difficult films to make, shooting without a completed script, facing a tight deadline. There was also on-set tensions between the director and Patrick McGoohan and female lead Jennifer O'Neill. It wasn't extremely well received at the time, only receiving middling reviews from critics, but it was quite successful, bringing in $14 million, more than triple its budget. Not a huge success, but a solid moneymaker, and it became one of the first Canadian films to go head-to-head with American films in the international market and come out ahead. After this, Cronenberg became a much more known commodity, leading to bigger projects and studio work. And here's a little nugget about that head-popping bit. It was originally intended to be the first scene of the film, before Cameron is captured, but it became feared that people walking in late to the movie would miss out on what was arguably the highlight of the film, so they moved it slightly further in. Of course, it would go on to spawn several sequels, including Scanners 2 and 3, as well as Scanner Cop 1 and 2. There was a remake rumored for a while from Darren Lynn Bousman, although that never happened, as well as several attempts to do a TV series, one as recent as last year, but again, nothing materializing. My rating here is a 4. It's a damn fine flick. The plot does wander around a bit, and I don't consider it one of the director's stronger entries, but it's an engaging story and has some standout moments. Its HCS is a 3.5, and it might seem a bit low because it's pretty known and prominent, But it's definitely one of Cronenberg's slightly less regarded flicks, and most people just know it for that one scene. And what a scene it is! But I think its impact isn't as big as it could have been. Should you watch it? Absolutely, it's good stuff.
Brother should be close, don't you think?
One day later, on the 15th, Jaws of Satan arrived, although it was also known as King Cobra, a far less interesting title. It's got a carnival train with a big ol' snake aboard, and there's some mysterious, possibly supernatural occurrences, and the hissy one gets loose. Everyone's favorite creepshow crate minder is here, and at this party we're introduced to little baby Kelly Bundy in her very first film role. And her mother is played here by Nancy Pretty, who is Christina Applegate's real-life mother. Father Pharaoh is foretold that he's about to face off against a powerful enemy, and there's either a snake behind him or a sock puppet shadow, one of the two. And Dr. Sheridan starts to think something's up when an unusual snakebite victim is brought in. This one was directed by Bob Claver, who did a ton of work in the industry, but 99% of it was on television and TV movies. This was actually one of his only films, and all over town, the snake attacks begin to increase. And it's weird because it's just mashing up so much. It's clearly trying to do the whole Jaws with snakes things. I mean, just look at the title for that. But it's also trying to be The Exorcist as well, and it even throws in a Psycho-style shower sequence to boot. So it's just all over the place. And I don't know why I love this so much, but the snake is on the doc's bed, like 3 feet from her. So she calls her guy friend, and he jumps out of bed, gets his clothes on, gets into his car, and motors to her place. And when he gets there, the snake has only advanced like 1 foot. Of course, there's a mayor who covers things up in order to help tourism, except here it's a dog track opening. And when it comes to movies in which Satan is masquerading as a larger than normal snake to get revenge on a priest, this has the market cornered. My rating here is a 2.5. It's got some good stuff happening, but it's really nothing special. But I wasn't bored or anything. It's just all around okay. Its significance is a touch lower at a 2 since it's a little more known, but not really, although it gets a big extra oomph for starting the career of Little Applegate. Should you watch it? Maybe. It's not great, but it's really not awful either.
Yeah, that's him.
Yep, that's a picture of a snake. One day after that, on January 16th, saw the release of Fear No Evil, which begins with Father Damon here hunting down this guy with killer sideburns that he says is Lucifer himself and kills him. But he says he'll be reborn. It then puts us in 1963 and baby Andrew is born, and there's clearly something up because his baptism is like tomato bisque, and then 18 years later, he's all grown up, and his parents definitely started late because they're like 60. He doesn't quite fit in at school, and this flick has a really great punkish soundtrack. And Andrew is drawn to the castle from the beginning of the film where a statue glows at him. His power starts to manifest when a group of guys kiss him in the shower, which I'm sure isn't subtext at all or anything. And this film was the directorial debut of Frank LaLoggia, who only made 3 films, although one of them was the pretty damn good Lady in White. But this was a difficult shoot, with weather causing several delays in the filming. Andrew's powers increase, but he's opposed by 2 women in the town that are archangels incarnate on Earth who are there to battle him. And this one may take a while to get going, but the final act gives us full-on zombies and skull head statues. And this might frequently get tagged as being an Omen or possible Carrier ripoff, but it's really not. There's some vague similarities in terms of overall theme, but it's more of its own thing. There's absolutely a gay subtext to this film, although I'm not sure it's intentional or if they'd admit it, or if this is more of a Freddy's Revenge situation, but it's definitely there. It didn't fare that well at the box office, but it wasn't a total bomb either, making $3 million on a $1.5 million budget, and critics were split. I guess you could say that I'm split on it too, because I'm giving it a 3. It's a fun flick with some good stuff, but it's also a weird mishmash of a bunch of concepts that don't seem to add up to a complete whole. For the significance, I'm gonna also give it a 2, since again it's a little more well-known, but it doesn't feature any career-launching stuff, and even though I think a lot of people remember seeing this one on the video shelves, I'd be willing to bet that those same people couldn't tell you what it's about. Should you watch it? Sure, it's entertaining enough.
Whew, I like that.
About a week after, in Italy, The Other Hell was released. Not that hell, the other one. This one didn't get released in America until a few years later in 1985 and begins with a nun finding some sort of secret lab in the catacombs of the convent, where we get some pertinent information.
The genitals are the door to evil.
We know. Both nuns end up dead right before the investigation commences by Father Inardo. Sister Rosario here knows something is up though, although is soon bleeding and showing stigmata shortly after dying, so a new priest comes in to see what's going on with a more scientific approach to things, and it's Carlo Di Meo, who was a staple of Italian horror around this time, also appearing in City of the Living Dead, House of the Cemetery, and Manhattan Baby. He starts to investigate,
and there is only one weapon with which to combat it. One weapon. The only one you can ever win with. True faith.
Man, you know, I used to think that the day would never come, that my life would depend on the morning sun. Franco Garofalo is here, who we also just saw in Hell of the Living Dead, and like that film, this was also directed by my man, Bruno Mattei, master of the horror ripoffs. Not only that, but it features a script that was co-written by Troll 2's Claudio Fragasso, so it's got a great pedigree, and it was itself sort of a knockoff, but not nearly as much as Mattei's usual. This one wasn't directly ripping off an existing property because the plot isn't inspired by a specific film, but he was trying to piggyback off of Dario Argento's Inferno. This was being shot before that was released, so it's not like he could copy it, but he tried to keep a bit of Argento's visual kicks going. And I should point out that Inferno translates to hell, and this is the other hell, in Italian, l'altro inferno. And here's the poster for Argento's film, and here's Mattei's. Once again, the score here is by Goblin, but it's not original music, and instead is simply recycled from existing tracks because of budgetary reasons. It gets pretty insane as it goes on with like killer babies, but very rarely makes much sense. So I guess he emulated Argento pretty well after all. My rating on it is a 3. It's a fun movie, but not really one of Mattei's more solid, wacky entries. It's actually a bit too down the middle for me. Not good enough for me to call it good, but not his usual silly schlock for me to enjoy it for that sake either. But it's still entertaining. Its HCS is lower though at a 2 because it's one of Mattei's lesser known entries and doesn't really have any of what he's truly known for. Should you watch it? I'd say yeah. It's good Italian nun fun.
The thoughts into...
Another one with a slightly disputed release date is Night of the Zombies, which some say came out in January, although others say June 1st, but it's possible that it could be the difference between the premiere and wide release. We're told that back in World War II, in the mountains, there was a fight between a Nazi unit and an American chemical warfare squad, with rumors of zombies being involved. An investigative team is trying to determine exactly what happened there, but that night, they're both killed. Because of this, CIA decides to send in one of their men, Nick Monroe, played by the legendary adult film actor Jamie Gillis, in a rare mainstream role, and he starts to uncover the story of what happened. This was the work of Joel M. Reed, who was pretty notorious for making the 70s horror classic Blood-Sucking Freaks, although this was his final directing job. He'd continue on as an actor in a handful of low-budget flicks, but didn't make any more films. This one went under a number of different names, including Gamma 693, Night of the Wehrmacht Zombies, Curse of the Ghost Battalions, Sister of Death, Battalion of the Living Dead, Zombie War Games, The Chilling, and even Night of the Zombies 2, since Bruno Mattei's Hell of the Living Dead was also released as Night of the Zombies. They soon discover that there are soldiers up there that have been alive since the war, feeding off of humans in order to stay alive. They were made that way by an experimental nerve gas called Gamma 693, and watching this one, it's pretty clear to see how Gillis never really attained any mainstream success. His acting is extremely wooden, and he only seems to perk up in a scene in which he's seducing a prostitute. This wasn't too successful, but did find some cult status later on and was a feature on Elvira's Movie Macabre, and my rating on it is pretty low, at a 1.5. It's pretty slow, but has a few cool bits, I guess. Its significance is about the same, since although the title is known, I think more people are thinking about that other one. Should you watch it? You can pretty safely pass. On January 23rd, a slightly higher profile American release happened with Blood Beach, and it wastes no time at all with having a woman pulled down into the sand by something underneath. And it's set at Santa Monica, right by the pier, and gives us Polly and Harry here, a harbor patrolman, and the woman who died in the intro was his ex's mother. And attacks start to happen on the beach, so Nancy's dad pops in to investigate. But of course, that doesn't stop people from coming to the sand.
So I go, well, I'm going even if you don't. So guess what I did?
I'm interested in something.
And if it's not totally clear by now, this was definitely trying to get by on some Jaws comparisons, even though they're completely different movies. It took it so far as to build its entire advertising campaign around it, since Jaws 2 had the tagline, "Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water." Well, this film's poster said just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, you can't get to it. And they actually say that in the freaking movie.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, you can't get to it.
The director was Jeffrey Bloom, who mostly did TV movies, but also directed the classic Flowers in the Attic adaptation. And what's weird is that this is a relatively tame movie, with just a little bit of blood here and there. But there's a DVD version with some extra scenes added of additional gore and nudity that seemed to be from an entirely different film, but they give us some extra flashes of monster. At the time of release, it was pretty poorly reviewed and didn't really have a lot of impact. Instead, just being seen as a B movie that had a slightly better than average cast, but it's gained a bit more of a cult following over time. It's pretty low budget and has less action going on than you would expect, and most of that action can easily be avoided, but people just insist on standing on the sand. And it saves the monster reveal for the final couple minutes, and it's a pretty cool monster effect, but it's perhaps too little, too late. My rating on it is just a 2. I want to rate it higher, but I like it more for what it promises and teases than what it actually is. Its HCS is a 2.5 for being one of the more noted Jaws ripoffs and featuring Saxon and Young and having a memorable creature. Should you watch it? Maybe for nostalgia's sake. I mean, if you watched it when you were younger, but sadly it's not as good as you hope it or remember it to be.
Blood Beach, man.
Yeah, right on.
Next up is a movie I'm really excited about because it's a TV movie that aired on February 6th called This House Possessed. And I saw this one time, and it may have been when it aired and never since, but it's always stuck with me. So let's see how this holds up. It begins with a garden hose attacking people like, oh no, not water! And the girl is Nightmare's Tina in her very first film role. And this is a travesty. If you go to Amanda Wiss's IMDb page and look at the section of movies that she's known for, Nightmare on Elm Street is not listed. It gives her most prominent role as a movie called The Id and a 7-episode stint on the Highlander TV show. Two things clearly more notable than Nightmare on Elm Street, goddammit. Anyway, one of the Hardy Boys is here as a pop star who collapses on stage from exhaustion, and super young David Paymer is here, and his manager might ride a bomb somewhere, and this is weird. I guess the house is spying on him via the TV. How is it doing this? Like, it's zooming in and everything. Is it some sort of like ghost cam or something? Gary hires Sheila here to be his private nurse while he recuperates, and they end up buying the house, which seems to have cameras set up everywhere, although I don't know why it needs them because the ghost can apparently see anywhere it wants. Sheila starts having weird encounters like voices in the night, old women calling her Margaret, and then Gary gets a bit aggressive, but the house sets off an alarm.
Well, I guess that kind of blows the moment, doesn't it?
You mean the moment that a woman was saying no to you over and over and pushing you away, but you kept moving in on her regardless? Is that the moment that's blown, Gary? The house seems to be defending Sheila, and when Gary's old girlfriend shows up, we get the scene that forever scarred my brain, my psycho moment, as she's trapped in the shower while blood pours out. I was horrified, but I mean, it doesn't harm her or anything. This ghost doesn't really seem all that bad. Spritzed some kids with water, stopped the rape, and rained blood on a nasty lady. In terms of haunted houses, I mean, I'd take it. Turns out Sheila has a secret past and secrets come out, and the ghost gets more murdery, and Critters 2's Harv shows up, as does the great Philip Baker Hall, who was officially never ever young. And my rating on this one is a 3, and I know that it's really not that good, but damn was this nostalgic for me. And it's not really that bad, but it is really nothing special. So understand that your experience may vary. Its significance is much lower though at a 1.5. It doesn't really do anything new and isn't remembered at all. But I'll give it the extra 0.5 for starting a career of Tina. Should you watch it? Probably not, unless you saw it a long, long time ago and want a nostalgic throwback. Next up on February 9th in Italy, oh boy, it's Porno Holocaust. I talked about this one a few episodes back, and it's here now. Yay. For a movie with this title, the opening theme song is awful jaunty. And it has a group of scientists comprised mostly of attractive women in bikinis, and they're in search of what they believe to be some sort of monster on a secluded island. There's also enlarged wildlife there, and George Eastman is here, of course, because this is another Joe D'Amato film, and the cast of this was mostly repeated from his earlier film, Erotic Nights of the Living Dead, and both films were shot at the same time, using the same locations. But this one is more just straight up X-rated material than that one, and is basically everyone bones before going to the island. And again, keep in mind, this is sort of a horror film, but unlike the other films I featured on the project that contained adult material, this one is basically a porn film with occasional horror. In fact, they don't even get on the boat to go to the island until around the 45-minute mark, but as soon as they get there, of course, everyone just goes off to have more sex. It takes until the 1 hour and 10-minute mark, because yes, this movie is 1 hour and 50 minutes long, but probably less than an hour if you cut out the sex. But the creature finally appears, and it's a mutated man who kills the doc and assaults his wife and then kills her. The monster then just starts killing everyone really quickly and then kidnaps Simone because they need to stall the movie, I guess. And yeah, I suppose if you want to watch some kind of uninspired porn, this'll scratch that itch, but it's certainly not going to work for your horror cravings, and has the hilarious bit where a good portion of the film builds up the romance between Simone and the captain, and he makes this big deal about falling for her and stuff until she gets kidnapped, and Contessa here thinks that everyone's gonna die, so she wants to bone the cap, and he does. Just kind of weird that they have this whole love story going, and then like 3/4 of the way through, just have that dude getting down with another lady. Oh, and one other thing. I guess that there's some discussion that the monster's penis is a prosthetic, and D'Amato says that's true, but I'm highly doubting that. It's possible that it's a fake in one particular early scene in the film, But there's a whole thing on the beach later, and yeah, I'm not buying that. I guess watch it and judge for yourself. I'm going with a 1.5 for this one. It's pretty dull from a horror and a porn standpoint. Its HCS is a 2 since it's not super well known, but it is probably one of the more notorious of D'Amato's staple. I mean, it was a bootleg sensation for quite a while back in the day. Should you watch it? No.
No, Namuro, no!
We end this block appropriately because on February 11th, we saw the release of My Bloody Valentine, which starts with a miner in a very distinctive getup murdering a girl, and then we're set in Valentine Bluffs, a small mining town in Canada, and everyone is getting ready for a big Valentine's Day dance, their first in 20 years. However, not everyone is excited about it since someone sent a real heart to the mayor with a warning. Seems a score back on V-Day, a bunch of miners were down in the caves and got left down there, and only one survived. Harry Warden. He went mad and killed a bunch of folks, cutting out their hearts, and the town canceled the dance out of fear that he's still out there. But now it seems like Harry may be back in action, using a pickaxe as his primary weapon of choice. There's also a love triangle going on here, as both TJ and Axel here are competing for the love of Sarah. And this one was directed by George Mihalka, and it would pretty much be his most prominent film. He did continue directing, mostly in television, and is still in the business today, although most of the rest of his career didn't really swing into the horror realm. And that could be because of this film. It cost about $2.5 million to make, which was a low but decent budget for the era, but only made about $5.5 back. Now that's definitely a profit, but in this era of post-Friday the 13th slashers, its competitors were performing much better, so Paramount called it a bust. Critics weren't too kind to it either, calling it derivative and a boring ripoff film, but time has been very, very kind to the film, with its reputation only increasing, and most considering it one of the best slashers of the era. It had a really tough time with the MPAA as well, who were really cracking down on the violence at this time, and cut out a solid amount of the gore that was shot, and the studio thought the footage to be lost. However, in 2008, a print was discovered with all of the removed scenes and have since been put back into the movie, even though the quality difference is pretty dramatic. Of course, there was also a remake in 2009 that was actually pretty well received, and even though it ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, it was never given a sequel, mainly due to that disappointing box office. I'm not disappointed though, because I give this one a 4 because it rocks. It's everything you want from an 80s slasher and has an actual good mystery going on. Its HCS is pretty high as well at a 3.5. I want to put it higher, but it just never established any solid horror careers and didn't become a franchise, but has become one of the more must-see slasher flicks of the era. Should you watch it? Yep, throw it on with a loved one this Valentine's Day.
Sarah, be my bloody Valentine.
So there you have it. It's the beginning of 1981. There was a really solid collection of movies to watch here. I liked a bunch of these, but my favorite of the bunch, and this is a tough call because between Scanners and My Bloody Valentine, but I'm going to give the slight edge to Scanners, just because I happen to really enjoy Cronenberg's style a touch more. So let's give that one to Scanners by a nose, just a little bit. But yeah, let me know what your favorite one of this block was down below. I want to hear it. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button. If you want more 80s Project to come to your inbox, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you get notified when they are released. And consider going to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines. These guys go there, I appreciate it, and thank you guys for just watching the video. And we'll see you very, very shortly as we continue on with the 80s Project.